What if the most powerful move of your life was also the most uncertain one? What if God whispered go and gave you no details, no destination, no timeline, no safety net? Would you still walk? Most people won't. They wait. They overthink. They pray for signs, confirmations, guarantees. But Abraham, he walked on nothing but a voice, on a whisper from the unseen, on a promise that had no proof. That's not just belief. That's dominance. That's faith as a weapon. Because true faith doesn't ask for the route, it obeys the call. He left everything, his land, his name, his logic. He traded certainty for destiny. And that walk, the one that began with no map, became the foundation of nations. Faith isn't safe. It's not predictable. It's not always comfortable. But when God speaks, and you step anyway, that's where history changes. So let me ask you, would you leave before you understand? Would you walk before you see? Because that's where real power lives, in the obedience that doesn't wait. Obedience is the first strategy of faith. Abraham wasn't lost when God called him. He wasn't broken. He wasn't desperate for change. He was settled, established, respected, living in a city of wealth and reputation, Ur of the Chaldeans, a man with land, livestock, legacy. And then, God interrupted the comfort. No warning, no explanation, just one command. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Not go to Canaan. Not you'll be safe. Not even here's why. Just go. That was it. And Abraham obeyed. He packed everything. He left everything. He walked away from what made sense and stepped into a future that didn't. Not because he had it all figured out, but because obedience was his strategy. He trusted the voice more than he trusted the facts. And here's the part we miss. This wasn't just a spiritual decision. It was a strategic one. It was dominance over fear, mastery over control, power through surrender. Because in the kingdom, obedience is often the first move that unlocks divine momentum. It's the decision that says, I don't need all the answers. I just need to trust the one who holds them. And maybe that's where you are right now. You've been asking for clarity. God is asking for movement. You've been waiting for confirmation. He's waiting for obedience, because breakthrough doesn't always begin with a blessing. Sometimes it begins with a simple yes. 1. Move without knowing. One of the boldest things Abraham ever did was say yes to a God-given command, with zero context, no location, no plan, no backup, just one word. Go. Let that sink in. Most people would ask, go where? For how long? Who's coming with me? What happens if it doesn't work out? But Abraham didn't negotiate. He didn't overanalyze. He didn't delay obedience while praying for more confirmation. He just walked. He left behind everything familiar. His hometown, his culture, his father's house, all the structures that once gave him identity and safety. Why? Because he trusted the voice more than he trusted the map. And that's what makes Abraham's faith so radical. It's not that he understood the journey, it's that he was willing to take the first step without one. You see, faith isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about trusting the originator. That's not weakness, that's spiritual strength. That's mental discipline, and it's rare because we live in a world that demands certainty, where vision boards and 5-year plans are glorified, where risk is avoided, where the unknown is treated like failure. But Abraham's story flips that logic. It tells us, real destiny lives on the other side of the unknown. The most powerful stories begin when we're brave enough to start without a script, So maybe the thing holding you back isn't a lack of calling. It's your fear of starting blind. But what if clarity isn't something you wait for? What if it's something you unlock, step by step, as you move? Because here's the truth. The greatest spiritual strategies don't begin with understanding. They begin with motion. And when Abraham moved, even without knowing, he positioned himself for everything God had planned. So the real question is not, do you know where you're going? It's, do you trust the one who's sending you? Now, Abraham didn't just leave. He had to let go, which brings us to the next strategy. 2. Detach to step in. Leaving is one thing. Letting go is another. Abraham didn't just walk away from a place. He had to sever ties with a system. God didn't say, take your family and friends and build something new. No. He said, leave your country, your people, your father's household. That's not just geographical, that's generational. Abraham was being asked to let go of the world that formed him in order to enter the world that God had prepared for him. And that's never easy, because the past doesn't just live behind you, it lives inside you. Abraham had grown up in a culture built on idols, control, and comfort. He knew the customs, the gods, the expectations. It was predictable, familiar, convenient. But calling will always challenge comfort. To truly step into his assignment, he couldn't just add God to his life. He had to leave the structure that resisted him. And here's the hard truth. You can't build the new while clinging to the old. That might mean walking away from relationships that dilute your faith, letting go of systems that feed your ego but starve your soul, cutting the emotional umbilical cord to places that once held you, but now limit you. Detachment doesn't mean dishonor, it means alignment. Because when God calls you higher, He also calls you cleaner, lighter, freer, and some things, even good things, can't survive in the place He's taking you. Abraham could have dragged his old life into his new land, but he would have forfeited the purity of the promise. Instead, he released what was behind him, so he could carry what was ahead of him. And maybe that's where you are right now. You're sensing the call, but you're still carrying the weight, still negotiating with what God already told you to leave. Let me tell you this. There is power in walking away when obedience demands it. And once you detach, the next test isn't action. It's waiting. Let's talk about that next. 3. Wait strategically. We talk a lot about walking by faith, but we don't talk enough about waiting by faith. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay still, not because you've given up, but because you know the promise takes time. God told Abraham, I will make you into a great nation. But decades passed, and nothing happened. No son, no heir, just silence. Year after year, he watched time steal his strength. He watched Sarah's body age. He watched logic scream, it's too late. But he still believed. Not perfectly, not without doubt, but he stayed in position. That's what made his faith strategic. He didn't let the delay rewrite the promise. And that's where many of us fall short. We confuse waiting with wasting. We think if it hasn't happened yet, then maybe it was never real. But Abraham shows us. Delay doesn't mean denial. Silence doesn't mean absence. And waiting doesn't mean weakness. God wasn't late. He was building capacity, not just for a child, but for a legacy. Because if Isaac had come too early, Abraham wouldn't have had the spiritual maturity to steward him. Sometimes God holds the promise until you become the person who can carry it. So what do you do while you wait? You prepare, you worship, you keep walking, you build altars, not excuses. You rehearse the promise louder than you rehearse the fear. Abraham's waiting wasn't passive. It was full of posture, prayer, presence. And when the time was right, not when it was easy, not when it made sense, but when heaven had aligned everything, the promise arrived. So if you're in the middle right now, living between the go and the there it is, don't rush it. Don't resent it. Don't try to shortcut what God is trying to stretch. Because waiting is not wasted time. It's strategic ground. And if you stay faithful in the stillness, you will see what He promised. But there's more. Sometimes, faith isn't just about waiting or walking. It's about obeying something. That makes absolutely no sense. Let's go there next. 4. Obey without explanation. What do you do when God asks for the one thing He gave you? What do you do when obedience feels like it contradicts the promise? That was Abraham's reality. He waited 25 years for Isaac, the miracle child, the proof of God's promise, the joy of his old age. And then God says, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him." No context, no reason, no, "Don't worry, I'll stop you at the last minute." Just go. Imagine the silence Abraham walked in that day. The weight, the confusion, the heartbreak. But still, he obeyed. Not because it made sense, but because the one who asked was the same one who promised. That's true power. Not the power to understand, but the power to surrender. Most people trust God's blessings. Few trust His instructions. But Abraham didn't negotiate. He didn't delay. He got up early, saddled his donkey, took Isaac, and climbed the mountain. That's leadership. That's what spiritual dominance looks like. Because faith isn't proven. When things are easy, it's revealed. When obedience costs you everything. And here's the truth. You don't need to understand the why. When you trust the who, Abraham was willing to give up the promise because he believed that God could raise the dead, if necessary. And that belief changed history. Because on that mountain, God didn't just test Abraham's obedience. He revealed His nature. Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides, right on time, right in place, right through obedience. So maybe right now, you're being asked to do something that makes no earthly sense. To let go, to give up, to step down, to forgive, to say yes, when everything in you says no, and you've been waiting for an explanation. But maybe obedience is the explanation. Because some of the most powerful moves in the kingdom begin with a silent yes. Now, after the mountain, after the knife, after the moment Abraham passed the test, he didn't stop moving. He kept walking. Let's step into that next. 5. Keep walking. Abraham didn't stop after he obeyed. He didn't retire from faith after the mountaintop test. He didn't say, "I've passed the hardest part, now I can coast." No, he kept walking, tent by tent, step by step, season by season, even after the miracle, even after the covenant, even after the promise was confirmed. He lived as a foreigner, a sojourner, a man without a permanent address, because his heart was anchored, not in a location, but in a direction. And that is a rare kind of strength. It's one thing to move when you're excited, another when you're desperate, but it takes a different kind of endurance. To keep moving, when the fire has faded, when you're not sure what's next, when the path isn't clear anymore. That's what Abraham did. He walked by rhythm, not by results. He didn't need fresh fireworks every step of the way. He was content with the quiet nudge. Keep going, I'm still with you. We often think faith is about the big moment, the leap, the breakthrough, the sacrifice. But real faith is also in the quiet, consistent steps. No one sees, no one praises, no one documents. That's where legacy is built. In the middle? In the walk between the promises spoken and the promises fulfilled. That's where most people quit, not in the storm, but in the fog, when the initial excitement wears off, when the testimony hasn't arrived yet, when the progress is slow, when heaven feels quiet. But Abraham never stopped, because faith isn't just about believing, it's about becoming, and that takes movement. So if you're in the middle, not sure what's next, not seeing the full picture, but still hearing that small voice, keep walking, then keep walking. That step matters, even when it feels small, especially when it feels small, because every step taken in obedience becomes part of the story that shifts generations. Now, there's one more piece, one more strategy that made Abraham's journey unshakable. He didn't just walk, he believed in something no one else could see. Let's go there. 6. Believe beyond what's visible. Abraham never saw the full picture, not with his eyes. He didn't live long enough to see the nations come from him. He didn't see the Messiah rise from his lineage. He didn't see stars equal his descendants. But he believed anyway, not because it made sense, but because the one who promised was faithful. He walked in tents and believed for cities. He held one son and believed for nations. He looked at a barren land and believed it would one day be called the Promised Land. That's not delusion, that's vision. Abraham's eyes saw sand, but his spirit saw destiny. Because faith isn't about what you see, it's about what you know deep in your soul. Even when everything around you says otherwise, this kind of belief is dangerous because it can't be manipulated. It doesn't depend on evidence. It breaks every rule of logic and still stands firm. That's why Abraham is called the father of faith, not because he saw more, but because he trusted deeper. And here's the power of that. God didn't just count Abraham's actions as righteousness. He counted his belief as righteousness. That means sometimes just believing is the boldest move you can make. Not building, not fighting, just believing. Believing when the odds are against you, when the report is bad, when the people around you don't see it, when even your own emotions betray you. That's what makes belief such a weapon in the kingdom, because faith doesn't need sight. It creates its own landscape. It walks on unseen foundations. It declares yes over deserts. It worships in the waiting, and it holds joy long before the harvest. So if all you're doing right now is holding on to a word, a whisper, a vision only you and God can see, don't let go, because the unseen today becomes legacy tomorrow. And Abraham proved that. Walk without seeing, trust without hesitation. Abraham didn't walk with clarity. He walked with conviction. He didn't have proof. He had a promise, and that was enough. Because true spiritual power isn't found in how much you understand. It's found in how far you're willing to walk without understanding. That's what separates average faith from mountain-moving faith. Let's go back for a second to the 6 moves that changed Abraham's life. He moved without knowing, not because he was brave, but because he trusted the one who called. He detached from the old, leaving behind comfort, culture, and control to step into calling. He waited strategically, believing that silence is not absence, and delay is not denial. He obeyed without explanation, because when you trust God's character, you don't demand reasons. He kept walking, not because the road was easy, but because the voice never left. He believed beyond what's visible, and that belief became the foundation of every promise we now stand on. This isn't just a story about a man. This is a roadmap for how you rise. When the world says, wait until it's clear, and heaven says, move before you see. So maybe God is calling you now. not to understand, but to obey, not to see, but to step, not to control, but to trust. Maybe your legacy begins the moment you stop asking how and start saying yes. Because the most powerful obedience is the kind that doesn't make sense on paper, but shakes things in the spirit. Abraham never saw the full promise in his lifetime, but his yes made it possible for generations to walk in it. And your yes today might unlock something far beyond you. So let this be your declaration. I choose to walk by faith, even when I can't see. I choose obedience over clarity. I choose trust over control. The journey doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be walked. Drop a comment. I'm stepping out. I don't need the map. I have the voice. Subscribe if you're hungry for faith that moves mountains, not just mouths. And share this with someone who's standing on the edge of a scary, sacred yes. Their obedience could be the beginning of a new chapter heaven's already writing.